Alright guys, welcome to Formula 1 news. The chaos continues at Red Bull Racing. Helmut Marko will officially leave the team at the end of this calendar year, and the official line is that Marko is leaving of his own volition, but there is clearly a lot more to this story than that, as we shall get into. Over the last 12 months, 5 crucial members of the Red Bull dynasty have left the team. Will Max Verstappen be long for the team either? Given these major recent developments, a new era is clearly in place at Red Bull, for the better or for the worse. Time will only tell. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always. We've got a lot to get into today. We're going to start here because this is Lando Norris's golden helmet, unlikely to be running it next season. Who knows? He was in the car with it today at the post-season Abu Dhabi Tyre Test. Now, lots of interesting storylines to talk about here, one of which is this. Ryo Hirakawa was in the wall in his Haas. Not ideal at a post-season test, but it is what it is. We also have some new tyres. So this is the old tyre on the right-hand side, the 2025 rear tyre, 18 inches, 720 millimeters tall, 405 millimeters wide. They are getting somewhat shorter and thinner for next year, quite significantly. You can see it very evidently when they are side by side. That means they're also going to be lighter. That is another benefit as well. Of course, they were testing them out on track today. This is also what the tyres look like, just out of interest. They've changed around a little bit with what they're doing on the side here. That is the current look of the 2026 compounds. We're going to see them properly on track not that far from today. In addition to, we will see the active aerodynamics for the first time. So just to give you guys the quick rundown, we're currently on the 9th of December. The 26th of January is pre-season testing in Barcelona. That's the first test. Couple of other tests that are going to be broadcasted happening in February after that in Bahrain as usual. But there will be a 4 to 5 day test. I think the teams are only able to do running on 3 of the days, if my memory serves me correctly, but we'll discuss that more when we get closer to the time. The point is that in a few weeks, really, the new cars will be on track in Barcelona. Yes, it's not going to be a public test with all the broadcasting teams there, but there will be photographers and there will be journalists, as we know. Now, those cars will have active aero, so for the mule cars they sent out today, with effectively what they do is they run them with Monza spec, because they're trying to just effectively estimate what the downforce will look like for next year. But some of the teams were showcasing ways that they're working on to actually do the active aero. So the front and rear wings will have 2 modes, a higher downforce mode, a lower downforce mode. They can set where those 2 modes sit, but they will exist all the time. Now, in the corners, we will see the higher downforce. On the straights, we'll see the lower downforce. The drivers will be able to actuate that. And DRS is gone, but on some level, it ain't too far away with what we're going to have next season. Now, the teams have been testing out ways to actually do this. This is Ferrari's hydraulic actuator, which is visible from the rear. So pretty interesting. Not sure if other teams, apart from Mercedes, really gave this a go, but you can actually see very clearly in these images what the 2 levels are. Now, how it will look next year on next year's front and rear wings, we'll see, but we get to see it in action right here. We get the top part, which is the higher downforce mode of the front wing. The bottom part, they've actuated down those couple of elements, so you get lower downforce. This is obviously what we're going to be seeing next year. Cool to see the first glimpses of it really in the postseason test. I'm not saying Ferrari are massively ahead of the curve on this one, but it is interesting because we didn't really see other teams doing anything quite this advanced. Certainly Mercedes' approach was, well, interesting, to say the very least. We'll show you guys that in a second. Hamilton was actually having a close look. He was here doing the postseason test. Don't always see that from Hamilton. He's not always so keen to do it, but you can understand that Hamilton really wants to continue to strengthen where he can the integration of himself into Ferrari, because, without getting heavily integrated, without getting the engineers, the mechanics, the team on his side, it's going to increasingly be a challenge for him to turn it around at that team. Schumacher had, well, he spent a long time trying to achieve the same thing before the cars finally started to deliver in the early 2000s. But that's what Hamilton was up to. Charles Leclerc was also there as well. This was Hamilton on the track in the Ferrari. You can see the low downforce on the rear wing. This, of course, actuated to the higher downforce position. That would, however, change when they're out there on the track. So some things they could play around with. This was Mercedes' approach, which, yeah, I don't imagine this is going to be what we're going to be seeing on next year's car. But yes, you can see the hydraulic fluids and all this stuff, and they've just basically just yammed this together on the front element so they can actuate it. I thought it was very interesting. The Ferrari approach was, let's say, somewhat cleaner, but regardless, at least you could tell what Mercedes were trying to do. So some interesting activity out there on the track today. We also had Isaac Hadjar in a Red Bull for the first time. So look, time moves on quite quickly, right? Isaac Hadjar, no longer a Racing Bulls driver. He is now a Red Bull driver for next season, and this was him in that Red Bull car today. Now, Lando was also on track. He did not run the number 1 on his car today, which is kind of interesting because he could have done, but he will for next season. We'll discuss a little bit more on that in a second. This is also the new steering wheel. We saw this being tested, I think, in FP1 actually earlier in the weekend. We're now seeing it in full force on the Ferrari. It's not radically different in a number of ways, but it is a noticeably different steering wheel. And I think it's at least good for Lewis Hamilton that this is at least one area they have listened to him on. So, look, if they're listening to Hamilton on the steering wheel, we know that Hamilton has completely defines how the steering wheels are on modern Formula 1 cars, right? Like, he effectively designed, or at least came up with the ideas for the way that F1 wheels have developed over the last 20 years, roughly. Now, of course, he's developed those in his own image at Mercedes. He will have joined Ferrari, and the first day in the car thought, damn, what is this, right? Like, it's kind of what I'm used to, but it's not as good as it could be, at least in Hamilton's eyes. So supposedly this new steering wheel design that was used in FP1 and is now being used in the test as well, Hamilton requested a simplification of all the procedures for changing the parameters, and obviously some other changes and tweaks, I imagine, as well. But Hamilton at least got his wish on this one, so maybe they're going to listen to his other suggestions as well. Time will only tell on that one. There's going to be a lot to discuss on Ferrari over the coming days. We can't do it all today because of the Red Bull stuff. Ferrari's car, by the way, is apparently going to be unveiled on the week of the 20th of January. So some teams are going to reveal their cars before the Barcelona shakedown, but then some will do it afterwards because it's not a public test in Barcelona, and they're not doing this big F175 thing again where they reveal all the cars at the same time. So that's why teams will vary. That's the rumour, according to Corriere. Of course, not yet confirmed by Ferrari. This is Hamilton getting out of the SF25 for the final time and being able to enjoy an off-season where he's going to totally unplug his phone is going to go in the bin, I think, in his own words, and we will see him in the new year. Couple of quick words on Lando. He did confirm in an interview with Sky Sports yesterday that he will be using the number 1 on his car next season. He actually had to make the decision yesterday, right? He got no time. He won the championship and he was asked, okay, do you want to keep number 4 or number 1? We need you to answer right now. He's going to take the number 1. I think it's the right thing to do. Norris, again, in a very Norris way, says that it's not actually about him. He's happy with the number 1. He's happy with the number 4, right? It is what it is. But Norris enjoys the fact that his team, his mechanics, the McLaren team that worked so hard to put that car together, they will get the enjoyment, they will get the appreciation of working on and seeing car number 1 on the track. So I think that was a very Lando Norris statement. He also made some other interesting comments in that interview, especially with regard to the level of ruthlessness. He pretty much said, naturally, he is not like a Max Verstappen or some of the more traditional champions, very macho, very intrinsically motivated. I think I described it the other day. But Lando recognises there is a lot of value to that, right? He's talked with a lot of sports psychologists this season. He's talked with a lot of former champions like Sebastian Vettel. And while Norris gets praise for his, vulnerability and the way that he is emotionally and all that, definitely as the season went on, he calmed down on the self-criticism, right? Like, he'd mess up laps earlier in the year and he'd say, oh, well, I'm just terrible, I'm not good enough and all this. And, he calmed that down as the year went on. He became, I think, slightly more rigid in that sense. And he recognises that, he did not morph into one of those type of characters, and I don't think that he ever wants to or ever will, but he recognised that there are some elements of those great champions that he did need to take on board into his own personality and integrate to a certain degree just to get the best out of himself, right? I think for Lando, that level of self-belief was always a little bit of a challenge for him. He actually mentioned in an interview, I thought it was fascinating, the Monaco Grand Prix qualifying, because famously he went under 1 minute 10 there for the first time ever. And at that point in the season, he was struggling to a certain extent. He turns up to Monaco such a difficult track to absolutely nail it and put together the fastest lap of all time around there, stuck on a pole, won the Grand Prix. And Lando felt himself that he was under a lot of pressure at that moment from his teammate, from himself as well, and that was the lap that gave him the self-belief to say, wow, I actually am that guy, like I actually can do this. And that really helped transform and grow his mentality as the season went on. And I think that even though he still struggled to a certain extent with that as the year went forwards, there were moments where he was able to tap into that kind of energy of like, okay, yeah, I'm actually the best driver on the planet, at least. You've got to believe that if you are going to be a Formula One world champion, I think, at least on some level. All of the top guys will have that opinion. And if anything is going to exemplify that belief even further for Lando, it's the fact that he actually won the title in the end. So I wonder what that'll do for Lando going forwards, because, if he's got any reason to be confident going into next season, it is certainly the result that we had this year at McLaren. Now, their big rivals, Red Bull Racing. Now, Red Bull walk away from this season with 0 championships won. They gave it a damn good go, Red Bull and Max Verstappen. But things are changing at Red Bull. They've been changing for some time, ever since the death of Dietrich Mateschitz a couple of years back. Things were starting to shift. Horner was fired back in July. He was given a lot of money to get out of the team. He will be back in Formula One, we think, at some point in the near future. We currently do not know where. Now, Horner ran that team, right? It was Horner Racing in some respects. There were rumours that many of the top staff, they had contracts which effectively meant if Horner goes, you can go as well, or something to that effect. There was a similar rumour with regard to Helmut Marko and Max Verstappen, right? There was a rumour that Marko had put a clause in Verstappen's contract which said that if Marko got fired, then Verstappen would be free to walk as well. There was then another rumour that they had taken that clause out and paid a certain amount of money to make that happen. Whatever, we don't know the truth. But rumour is that the Horner clauses have been relinquished in exchange for financial incentives. So some of the top staff that had these Horner clauses, they were told, all right, if we go to Horner, then we'll pay you some money and then we don't have to worry about that type of thing. So it's all been happening at Red Bull. Yesterday, we talked about the major rumour that Helmut Marko was set to leave the team. Immediately after the checkered flag flew in Abu Dhabi, Marko was asked, people must have had some inkling about this, will you be there next season? What's going on at Red Bull? And Marko says, well, we'll see about that. And it turns out that we have seen rather sooner than we expected, because Helmut Marko officially is going to leave Red Bull Racing. A day that, I think we always expected would come, but the circumstances that it's happening, it is quite remarkable. Now, as I say, officially the team's line is that Marko has chosen to step down. There is clearly a lot more going on here. But Marko is gone. A very controversial character in Formula One. He said a lot of things that have been pretty outrageous over time. But you can't dispute his impact on this sport. From Sebastian Vettel to Max Verstappen, among so many other great champions. There are, I want to say 7 drivers on the grid today, maybe even 8. I might be missing one. But look, Max Verstappen, of course, his new teammate Isaac Hadjar, Liam Lawson, Arvid Lindblad onto the grid, Pierre Gasly, Alex Albon, Carlos Sainz. All of those guys owe their careers, at least in some part, to Helmut Marko. Yuki Tsunoda, of course, another example. He's just been off the grid. Plenty of other names, of course, connected with that Red Bull Academy, the program. And Marko's been so instrumental at Red Bull over the last kind of 25 years as Dietrich Mateschitz' right-hand man. So, look, as controversial as he is, he was part of the furniture at Red Bull. And he also loves this, right? He loves the game. And he doesn't, want to step down in an environment that he feels is favourable. Now, when we discuss some of the reaction from Red Bull and the idea of Helmut Marko stepping down, which is the official line that we shall see here in a second after some of Red Bull's reaction, you've got to wonder whether maybe Marko did step down under the premise that this is not the organisation that he wants to be a part of anymore, as it was under Mateschitz and Horner. As much as Horner and Marko did not always necessarily see eye to eye, they felt to a degree like two sides of the same coin. Now, Laura McKee says the following: "It is very sad news that Helmut is leaving us. He has been an integral part of our team and of Red Bull's entire motor racing program for more than 2 decades. This is therefore the end of a remarkably successful chapter. His departure will leave a void, and we will truly miss him. I'd like to express my sincere gratitude for his unwavering support, not only over the past months, but also during my early days at Scuderia Toro Rosso. On a personal note, Helmut, along with Oliver Mintzlaff, a key figure we'll get to in a second, was the driving force behind bringing me back into the Red Bull family, first in Faenza and then this summer in my current role in Milton Keynes. Helmut is a real racer at heart, always pushing us to the limit, always prepared to take risks in pursuit of our goals," which that does sum up Helmut Marko pretty well, I've got to say. Mintzlaff, who's now running the show at Red Bull, really. You've got Mark Mateschitz, who is Dietrich's son, but effectively on the Austrian side of things, Mintzlaff runs the show. He says, "Helmut approached me with the wish to end his role as motorsport advisor at the end of the year. I deeply regret his decision, as he has been an influential figure for more than 2 decades, and his departure marks the end of an extraordinary era." So, look, do we believe Red Bull that Helmut Marko approached the team and said, "Look, I want to leave"? Okay, maybe in the circumstances that Marko no longer feels, with no Mateschitz, no Horner, no Wheatley, and many others we'll get to in a second, that he's no longer in charge as he used to be. He can no longer make the decisions that he used to be able to make, and maybe he wants to leave that environment. Fair enough. There's also a possibility they sacked him over some drama that we'll see right about now. Marko's comments run as follows. He says the following: "I've been involved in motorsport for 6 decades now, and the past 20 years plus at Red Bull have been extraordinary and an extremely successful journey. It has been a wonderful time. I've been able to shape and share with so many talented people. Everything we have built together fills me with pride. Narrowly missing out on the World Championship this season has moved me deeply and made it clear that now is the right moment for me to personally end this very long, intense and successful chapter. I wish the entire team continued success, and I'm convinced they will still be fighting for World Championships again next year," effectively. So, pretty remarkable. The drama with regard to this is whether Marko got himself fired over this development. Now, I think this probably is relevant to what has happened with Marko. It could be from one way or the other. Either Marko has been effectively sacked over this, or Marko has seen Red Bull undermine his intentions and thought, well, you know, this is not the same organisation I was once a part of. So the big rumour here was, and to be fair, this was a rumour a couple of months back, that he was interested in Alex Dunne. So Alex Dunne, Irish Formula 2 driver. He was definitely one of the stars of Formula 2 this season, for good and for bad on occasion. Clearly a Marko driver at heart. Talented, fast, a bit crash happy, bit of a terrorist sometimes. You know, it is what it is. That's what Marko drivers tend to be like. Alex Dunne fits the bill. He wanted to sign him onto the Red Bull program, and Dunne left McLaren as a result of this, right? We saw he left the McLaren driver development program. It looked like he was going to go to Red Bull. That then never happened, because apparently Marko signed Arvid Lindblad on his own initiative, even though no internal discussion had been made at Red Bull. Now, of course, with the whole power struggle and Horner being gone, Marko apparently, according to this article, believed that, okay, he now calls the shots. Now, to be fair, Marko, on some level, always kind of called the shots. He was put in by Dietrich Mateschitz. He was his man. So that's how it worked. And if Marko wanted to sign somebody, he'd go out and sign him, pretty much. I guess with Horner gone, Marko felt like, oh, well, you know, I've won. That's even more true than it previously was. He goes out and signs Lindblad. Then he goes on to sign Dunne from McLaren, effectively. Now, apparently this is a controversial deal. Marko knew the shareholders, team principal McKeith and Mintzlaff had decided Dunne would not be an option for the development program, but Marko went and did it anyway, and apparently Red Bull's management were not very happy with this. Marko was ordered to terminate the deal. Dunne was never presented as a Red Bull driver. Red Bull had to pay a load of money to get out of the contract, and, you know, it's awful for Dunne as well, right? Like, I do think he's a driver with some potential. He is going to be back on the F2 grid next year, I think, anyway. But it's still very unfortunate for him that he leaves the McLaren program effectively to go to Red Bull, and that never happens because, well, Marko's intention to sign him gets undermined by Red Bull management. And that's why I can see both sides. Did Marko leave in this circumstance thinking, well, this is not the organisation I know and love that would just do what I say effectively and give me the leeway to make some mistakes but find some hidden gems, diamonds in the rough, as it were? Marko then obviously had the whole Antonelli drama. Was that the final straw? You know, he apologized under pressure from Red Bull, possibly. I think, again, I believe that people at Red Bull have wanted to get rid of Marko for some time. Now, that's my underlying opinion. Maybe Marko did walk away on some level, and this feels like a bit of a mutual decision. But I think it's quite clear that people like Oliver Mintzlaff and those on that side of the organisation, given the Horner drama, given everything that's happened at that team over the last couple of years, could definitely desire a future with Helmut Marko no longer getting involved in what they want to do. So I do believe that this was at some point inevitable, and Marko has now parted ways with the team. Officially, that will be the case on the 31st of December. So this is where we are with Red Bull Racing. Things have changed an awful lot in the last couple of years. I mean, Rob Marshall, who's in the top right of this image, he departed. He's gone to McLaren, helped build this year's car. And look at all these other names. Now, GP, we think, is still there. He's not leaving yet at all. The big rumour is that he is definitely set to stay. There were some questions about whether he might step into a different role at Red Bull, but, you know, him and Max Verstappen surely are going to be inseparable. So that's, you know, not so relevant top left, but I will say you could replace that image of GP with Will Courtenay, who was their top strategy guy, who's now been poached also by McLaren. He's on gardening leave. He's set to join McLaren shortly afterwards. Jonathan Wheatley, another key feature of the Red Bull dynasty. He's gone now at Sauber, Audi, no longer Sauber. Adrian Newey is gone. Helmut Marko is now gone. Christian Horner is now gone. So, look, the key players. And it's strange to have, like, nostalgia for this Red Bull era. But, like, I don't know, I'm feeling a bit nostalgic for what Red Bull used to be. Because they're clearly a different team nowadays. And it's incredibly frustrating at times that Red Bull were as an organisation to cover and to deal with, and just to see the antics they would put up. Boy, were they entertaining, right? And it's just, things have moved on. Probably that was inevitable, but the question is, how important were all of these figures to the success of the team? Probably very important. And this year, despite some heroics from the team behind the scenes and from Max Verstappen, especially individually, they still just fell short in the Drivers' Championship. Pierre Wache is still there, Hannah Schmitz is still there, Max Verstappen is there, but one does have to wonder for how much longer will that be the case? Because, of course, there was major discussion earlier, last year, March 2024, Max Verstappen said this: "It is very important we keep the key people together. If such an important pillar falls away," talking about Marko, "that's also what I've said to the team, that is not good for my situation. So for me, Helmut has to stay." Things, however, have changed. The departure of Horner and all of that. I think at that time the belief was that Verstappen was very much on the Marko side of the Red Bull civil war. He was more keen, and certainly Jos Verstappen was more keen for Horner to go than for Marko. So with Horner out of the picture, it feels a little bit maybe better for Max Verstappen. Of course, he still calls the shots over there at the end of the day. Eric Van Haren says this isn't going to make any difference for Verstappen's future, not in the short term, but in the medium term, you absolutely have to wonder whether these names on the screen here, whether the man in the bottom right could also be out of the picture in the near future as well. Because, if Red Bull's car isn't great next season, pretty much all of these guys from that Red Bull era are gone. It's a different team, and if the car isn't good enough, if the powertrain isn't good enough, Max will have offers. He will be speaking to Toto Wolff. We'll see what the future holds. But intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Just a couple of final things, actually, talking of Mercedes. Carlos Mikel had this to say: "They tell me at Aston Martin there's a lot of confidence in the aerodynamic design." No massive surprise there with Adrian Newey calling the shots. But they do have many doubts about the Honda engine and the Honda powertrain. So that is, of course, the key question. Will the car look like this? It's going to look something like this. I actually think that next year's cars could look really good. The FIA mock-up isn't particularly pretty, but I don't know. I think next year's cars are going to look pretty spectacular, actually, once they start to hit the tracks, as long as they've got enough colour on them, which apparently the FIA is going to mandate as well. But in the paddock, the only engine being talked about is Mercedes. So that certainly says something, and will also give some concerns to Ferrari as well. We'll discuss that in more detail in the near future. So very much enjoyed to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.